Welcome. This is the first in a series of videos, micro lectures, podcasts, whatever you want to call it, on the Silmarillion of Tolkien, read through the lens of von Clausewitz, the great theorist of war. So let me show you the editions, because I will occasionally give you page references, and you could follow along. So here is one of the classic editions of the Silmarillion by Tolkien. This is just a magnificent piece of literature. I mean, it's really the more you read it, the better it gets. Right? It's full of poignancy, tragedy, decay, and sorrow, but also these incredible moments of of valor, of love, of longing. Great stuff. So we're going to read the Silmarillion, and as you perhaps know, this is the fundamental underlying text of Tolkien's lore. And then for the von Clausewitz, I'm going to use what is, I think, the highly regarded edition. It's from Princeton, von Clausewitz on war. And this is a very nice edition. Okay, so I'm going to do one of these 20 minutes, something like that, 20-minute podcast across 12 weeks, where we'll kind of use Clausewitzian ideas to really kind of unpack some of the depths of Tolkien. Von Clausewitz was a veteran of many battles, something in the region of 20 military battles. He'd been at the Battle of Borodino, where he was, oddly enough, although he was Prussian, he was fighting for the Russians at that point, and he actually even was a part of the battle of the famous Battle of Waterloo that ended Napoleon's reign. Tolkien, of course, was no stranger to war. He had fought in the Battle of the Somme, perhaps one of the most famous battles, an absolute, at least at the start, an absolute disaster for the British, a true bloodbath. And he fought there, but was ultimately invalided out when he got trench fever. It's created by lice. And he got it really, really badly. It really disabled him, and he spent 2 years in hospital. So, he missed the rest of the war through that illness. So what I want to say here is that Tolkien and Clausewitz are in many ways very similar men, in that they thought exhaustively about war. And now, look, Tolkien is about a lot of different stuff, but one of the kind of the base notes in Tolkien is definitely the problem of war. Not only because, like the Silmarillion, it's just a series of different kinds of wars, right? And some of these wars have names, like the War of Wrath, when the gods return to smite Melkor. And then, of course, the Lord of the Rings is about the War of the Ring. He was actually going to call it that. That was going to be the title of the book. And then, although The Hobbit's not exclusively about war, it does end with, the Battle of the Five Armies. So Tolkien is a man who, like Clausewitz spent, pretty much most of his life fighting in war. He was a professional, long-standing career officer. But Tolkien as well, and in this, I want to make this point about Tolkien. Maybe some of you have looked at this, The Monster and the Critics. This includes some of Tolkien's very rare academic works. He never wrote an academic monograph. He only wrote a few scholarly essays. But the one on Beowulf, that's this one, The Monsters. This is the title of it, right? The Monsters and the Critics. That is a wonderful essay. I know the man was busy writing a brilliant, globally important literature, but it's a real shame he didn't also write more academic pieces, because this one on Beowulf is absolutely brilliant. But the point about Beowulf, so he studies Beowulf his whole life, And of course, it's about a warrior who confronts these monsters. And it is really interesting what Tolkien says about it at one point. And this is why I want to say that Tolkien really is a man like Clausewitz who thought, yes, he thought about a lot of things, but he thought pretty consistently and exhaustively about the problem of war. And I'll just read one thing he says about what's the importance of the poem Beowulf, and recall that it is actually, Tolkien is like one of the great authoritative voices on the significance of that poem, and he kind of revolutionized the way that people thought about it. But he says this. So the issue, part of the issue is with Beowulf, was it a pagan? So it dates to around the year 1000, and I think Tolkien more or less agrees with that dating. And the question is, was it really a sort of a pagan work, or was it a Christian work? And Tolkien says, that's the way that the critics, right? The critics, right? It's called the monsters and the critics, right? The critics had kind of wanted to tease out that problem, and he says that's the wrong way to think about it. What it's about is the kind of human encounter with that which is aversive to human civilization. And so he says the following. He says, for the monsters do not depart, right? So with the coming of Christianity to England, and so, Beowulf was written by a Christian monk from the north of England. Exactly who this character was, I don't think is understood. Probably will never be understood. So it says, for the monsters do not depart, whether the gods go or come, right? The gods, so either the sort of the Norse ancient gods or the Christian god. A Christian was and is still like his forefathers, a mortal hemmed in a hostile world. And that's what Tolkien thinks the poem is about, right? So whether it's a kind of an ode to the pagan world or a celebration of Christianity is not relevant, he says, right? Because Christians, like any other human being, is hemmed in a hostile world. The monsters remain the enemies of mankind. Super interesting now, to the point of war. The monsters remain the enemies of mankind. The infantry of the old war, and became inevitably the enemies of the one God, the Christian God. And who is that Christian God? That Christian God is the eternal captain. The eternal captain of the new. Of the new what? Well, if we parallel it with the infantry of the old war, then God, the Christian God, is the captain of the forces or the armies of the new war against the perduring monsters that beset pagan and Christians alike. Okay, so point here I'm trying to make is that to show you that, right, that Tolkien spends his whole academic life thinking about teaching Beowulf, and as he understands Beowulf, it is a case of civilizations finding ways to combat enemies, specifically an existential enemy, right? The monster, right? The enemy is going to take all forms and shapes, right? But the way that this is thought about by Tolkien, in the way in which kind of Clausewitz would think about it as well, right, is that you have a captain who marshals the armies. And you see that, right, even with someone like Gandalf, right, a lord of great reverence, right, who in white clothing sort of charges into battle, leading the forces of good against the forces of evil, right? So I just want to say that Tolkien, I'm trying to sort of justify, right, why I'm running together Tolkien and Clausewitz. So let's get into some specifics. So Clausewitz starts the famous book by saying that all war is a series of duels. And this is very interesting from a Tolkien perspective, because if you know the Silmarillion, or actually let's start with something that's almost surely known, right? Which is the famous duel in the Mines of Moria between the Balrog and Gandalf, right? So two creatures, an angel, Gandalf, and the sort of Balrog dragon thing, kind of go head to head in a duel. But there's loads of other examples of this, right? When in the Silmarillion, when Feanor calls out and confronts Melkor, and they have a combat, Melkor wins, right? And Melkor, who of course is Sauron's boss, and Melkor wins and kills Feanor. Or when Lithwien of Beren and Lithwien, when Lithwien has a kind of, it's not a combat exactly, although it is a sort of a combat, right? It's a kind of a strategic or tactical confrontation between this malevolence and the beauty, right, of her dancer. It's almost like almost kind of like a judo kind of thing that Lithwien does to kind of disarm the enemy. So there's another duel. And then there's, there are so many, right? I'm just naming a few, right? And then, there's the phenomenal one between Huan, the hound, that kind of loves Lithwien, and the Karkarath, which is this wolf that has been created by Melkor specifically. It's like a trained tool to kind of take down the dog, Huan, that loves Lithwien and will protect her and in principle, die for her. So you have this idea of these duels, and you'll see that all the time in Tolkien, I think. Now, I think theoretically, at the start of On War, Clausewitz makes this distinction. He says you've got to pull apart the problem of force from the problem of politics. At least theoretically, you've got to prescind the one from the other, right? Theoretically. And he says of force, and this I think is really picked up by Tolkien, he says of force that it has no internal principle of moderation. That if you had two forces confronting one another and one of them decided to moderate, then all that would happen, it would be defeated. But force is not going to do that, right? What's going to happen is the more the one force amplifies, so the other one will, right? So they're both going to spiral up together or spiral down together, right? But they're going to, until one of them breaks, right? Until one of them is destroyed or submits, right? But, the problem about force is that it is unrestrained, at least in principle. It is unrestrained, it is unbalanced, and it intensifies again and again. It just ratchets up, okay? But here's the thing. That is what Clausewitz calls war in the abstract. And I'll say a bit more about that in a minute. But here's the thing. The reason it's war in the abstract, or a kind of an almost algebraic kind of a way to think about war, is that force must use tools. It must use the tools of the arts and sciences. And as it engages with the tools of the arts and sciences, it necessarily engages with civilization, and therefore with political economy. Right? So political economy, that would be economy, the resources of a civilization or a nation. And the political, of course, would go to kind of the will, the organizational principles, the sort of establishment of legitimacy and authority, right, in a nation or a civilization. So the thing is, right, although force by itself has no principle of moderation because it uses tools of the arts and sciences to conduct itself.